Thank you for tuning in to the Fast Performance Podcast. The Fast Performance Podcast is brought to you by Kaiser. Kaiser, powering human performance. In this episode, we speak with the Director of Athlete Performance at Red Bull, Per Lundstam. In this episode, we talk about the exciting research coming out of Red Bull and Per's work with regards to pushing the limits of endurance and the role our brain plays when managing fatigue. Be sure to subscribe to the Fast Performance Podcast on your favorite podcast player, and you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram by searching Fast Performance CO. We hope you enjoy this episode with Per Lundstam. Are ready to roll. 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're back with another Fast Performance podcast, and my name is JC.
I'm Joel Rather.
And we are joined by our esteemed guest today, a longtime friend of mine and a fellow professional in the winter sports industry for a long time as well. Per Lundstam, who's the Director of Athlete Performance at Red Bull. He is the Director of Athlete Performance at Red Bull in Santa Monica. He supports the athletes in pursuit of their performing athletic performance, as well as building platforms for human exploration and athletic performance. Per started with Red Bull in January of 2010 and has been an integral part of the very dynamic world of Red Bull and Red Bull athlete services for over 9 years. I guess where are we at now? Per, is that 9 years, 10 years? How long have you been there?
Yeah, it's 10 years at this point in time, yeah.
Outstanding. Per was the keynote speaker at the original MountainCon event that we did in 2018 up in Vail.
Right.
And we are fortunate to have him here today. His roles over the years have included work with U.S. Ski and Snowboard Association, as well as working with the Swedish Ski Federation back in the early 90s over a 4-year period. Per currently works and is talking to us from Park City, Utah. And we're happy to have him on the show today. Thanks for joining us, Per.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's start with a softball here. How are you guys holding up during the whole strange world of the COVID-19 virus that we're living in right now? Obviously, you're not doing much out in Santa Monica, I'd imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Red Bull, as many other companies and programs, organizations, had to change the approach a little bit, and we all working from home and trying to still have a little bit impact on athletes and the staff that we work with and all the stakeholders. So, yeah, we migrated into doing our work from home, just as many other people and you guys are doing. So we try to still come up with processes and programming how we work with athletes through digital means and digital platforms. So that's what we've been doing over the last couple of months here.
Yeah, that sounds like that's the world we're living in right now, is writing a lot of online programs, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the projects that you had been involved recently that I know our listeners are very interested in. I know you talked a little bit about this up in MountainCon, but some of the research that had come out was still pretty fresh at that time. Let's talk about, starting with the Project Endurance 2.0. Let's talk a little bit about, or maybe you can sort of elaborate a little bit on what the project was, and that'll lead us into Joel and I asking you some questions for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. Now, as a Red Bull performance program, we always trying to understand how we fit into the athletes' world and to their performance progressions, right? Many of our athletes are already supported at a very high level by coaches and sports science groups, etc. So Red Bull Performance, we trying to understand how we fit into that that landscape and are able to contribute a little bit to the athlete's progression on top of what they already have in place. So we always trying to understand for each individual athlete and each group of athletes how we can give them information, give them feedback on where opportunities might be hidden, to improve a little bit further. So Red Bull has been dynamic in its approach and how we support the signed Red Bull athletes outside of more the general and normal type of sports science and performance support. So we have really been trying to understand how we put teams together, agile teams around the athletes, and come up with projects that potentially could find aspects in their performance makeup, physiological, morphological makeup, and find nuances that potentially could be interesting for them and their coaches to dig into and get a sense for, and we always try to come from that angle a little bit and find those small opportunities that might fit the athletes.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I mean, we're talking about what we talk about are separators. Like the 1% of 1%. How can you enhance the performance for those individuals? And maybe for our listeners, just so they understand, what does it take, or what does Red Bull as a company look for? Like, how do you get identified as a Red Bull athlete? Like, what do they, just for people who don't know anything about it, what does it look like? Like, how do you become a Red Bull athlete? What does it take?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just like you're saying. It's very interesting. Dynamic and channel for athletes trying to get into the Red Bull world. We have pretty strict regulations or strict levels of athlete performances to get into be signed by Red Bull, right? So we have different aspects of what you need to be to get signed up. So obviously you need to be a very, very top performing individuals. You need to be like top 3 in the world, or on a trajectory being top 3 in the world. And then we really work hard on to understand if it's a good Red Bull fit for the organization. And we have coaches out in the different sports disciplines, and we have athlete marketing managers, it's called, to kind of scout the landscape of new and upcoming athletes that could be a good fit for the brand. As well as for Red Bull, we're really trying to understand what consumers, how they see Red Bull, and that it fits well with the consumers. So we do get affected by the landscape, the marketing landscape, and also where we feel like people really will want to associate with the brand and want to be a part of Red Bull, and kind of that whole landscape and the organization. So it's not easy to become a Red Bull athlete. It's pretty amazing when you do. We're very fortunate that Red Bull is super supportive on all different layers, everywhere from the owner and every layer in the leadership team to be so excited and want to be so supportive of our athletes. So it's an incredible space to be a part of Red Bull Performance, as it's genuinely one of the pieces that are really supported by Red Bull and the team here.
And I just remember, like, I don't know how long ago it was that you and Andy jumped ship from the ski team and wound up going to Red Bull, but I remember, having this conversation with a few of my fellow industry professionals in the snow sports world that when you guys jumped ship and went to Red Bull Sports Science, everybody said, Red Bull Sports Science? What's that?
Right.
I thought they were an energy drink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once people, I guess, just don't have a handle on how big an animal that program is.
Right.
I mean, it's just from Formula One to cliff diving to breakdancing and DJs and everything else, the entire culture that's behind it. I mean, it's such a massive animal that people just don't get it. And then when we were talking about, obviously your facility in Santa Monica, which is like a skunk works. I mean, nobody really, knows it exists, and you got to know somebody's brother's cat to get in there. And
Right. Yeah.
it's just a remarkable machine that you guys have put together to support these athletes.
Yeah, no, it is, and we're very fortunate in the program that it's so supported on all different levels, and it's a big passion for the owner is the athletes that are representing the brand to such a high level and inspiring level. We have about 840 athletes worldwide that represent the brand, so it's a big piece of the Red Bull organization, and we always see that the athletes really express the brand in a very good way, and it really kind of speaks to who we want to be as a brand, and it really represents kind of where we want to be, and the vision, and how we inspire people and ideas, really. So the athlete group really gets supported at a very high level, and like you said, it's pretty amazing that a company like ours have a performance brand and a sports science team behind the athletes. It's just fascinating, and really shows where we want to be, and how much we want to support the athletes who represent us.
Now, the next question may go, slightly above or into a different realm of Red Bull as a product, or even going to, say, the marketing side of the house. But how do you guys choose what sports or what lifestyles you're getting into as far as those athletes go? Like, I was surprised to know that most people don't know Paul Rabel from lacrosse is a Red Bull athlete, right?
Yes.
So, like, you have so many different arms. How does Red Bull choose, like, well, we're going to get into this world, or we're going to get into that world from an athlete's perspective? What is that? How do you guys figure that out?
Yeah, right. Like you said, it's not really my arm of expertise, but it's definitely something that always is discussed, and it's always something that we're trying to figure out. What sports really going to represent the brand, and what sports and athletes are really going to be a good fit for Red Bull and the organization. How we talk to our consumers, and we involved almost in all sports, right? We 100+ sports that we work with, so it's trying to navigate that with the representation of the brand, and where we see traction with consumers and people that really want to be involved in the brand. So that's a constant navigation from our marketing team and sports marketing team, and that they choose which field to be playing in, and the athletes in that space come our way, and that's when we get involved, trying to understand the sport at a higher level, and how we can then help the athletes both from a sport characteristical side, as well as on the individual side, and then help them to perform at a higher level and for a longer period of time, and get to their optimized performance state more often and faster.
Right, right. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, from a perspective of, that assessment and kind of taking that a little bit further, then would you say that, the objective, so to speak, is to, after you make that identification process and you look at these, like you said, highly, successful and what you would definitely, categorize as some of the best people in their respective, sports and things like that. Once you get those folks, then my interpretation of, a lot of what you guys do is to then take that person, do some profiling on them, find out like what maybe identification of what does make them potentially that, that separator within their sport as being an elite athlete, and then looking for factors within that given, whether it's skill set or physiology or whatever that might be, and determine how do you continue pushing or expanding that envelope further. Would you say that that's an accurate representation? Am I off base with that? Like, how is that? Because to me, that's what I'm kind of gathering, and a lot of what I've listened to you speak and looked at a lot of things you guys do. To me, that seems like a lot of what the goal is how do we continue to expand that threshold or widen that spectrum within that given individual and their sport. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is. I think that's very close. For us as a performance program, we are fairly flexible and agile in terms of how we support our athletes. We have, like I said from the beginning, we don't want to replicate what athletes already exposed to. So we have been very fortunate in that we can be more unorthodox, right, in our approach. We're able to create projects with great resources around the athlete, put the athlete in the center, and then build a team around the athlete and the environment around the athletes, trying to understand at a higher level what really are the needs for the athletes. So we have been really fortunate in that way, that we don't have to really work in a very locked down kind of situation. We're able to put teams, put resources, be more agile around the athlete, and with the hope of finding what the athlete really needs in their environment, in the sportive environment. So it's very fortunate that way, and I think we have been able to really help athletes at a higher level and more targeted level, more specific to their needs in the field, right? So it's very easy to kind of get stuck and bogged down in traditional work and how we've done work within federations and programs, etc. But what really gives us an opportunity to look at it from a little bit different angle and point of view. So really cool, really specific and targeted to the athlete's needs, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I at Ski Club Vail, I had the title of Human Performance Director, which everybody said, "Oh my gosh, that's the coolest title ever." I'm like, nope, guys at Red Bull have got that way better than I do. I can tell you that.
So, yeah, right.
Yeah. So getting into what you were just talking about with those athletes, you're talking about, performance enhancement from or given to the top 1% athletes and in their respective fields, more or less.
Right.
And so let's talk about that. Let's go into that vein just for a second. When you get an athlete in, let's say from a sport that you're relatively unfamiliar with, it could be. I can't really pull out an example because you've worked with so many unique athletes. It's kind of difficult to say that. But are you doing some type of a hard analysis of key performance indicators for that individual's sport or their overall athleticism? I mean, how do you figure out this is what we need to enhance, or maybe let's take this in a different direction and say this is what we need to enhance to make them better at what they're doing? How do you guys figure that out? What is the process to that?
Yeah, so just what you're saying, many times we are exposed to athletes we have no idea what to do with, that they come into the world of Red Bull Performance, and the first thing we do is trying to understand, what their current situation look like. Well, what type of coaches do they have? Do they have a sports science group behind them? How much have they been exposed to analytics and to testing, et cetera, et cetera? So the biggest piece and the first piece I would say is to understand if there are coaches that can really help us navigate and create questions that we're then trying to solve. So that's the fundamental piece is to have a coach on board and to really kind of clean up a lot of the noise and trying to get to the questions that potentially a coach have at a very high level. Many coaches that are involved in sport, they have a kind of a bell curve where they're energetic and driving really hard from the beginning, and then maybe eventually they start to ask questions and trying to have really interesting concepts in how they work with the athlete, and hopefully we can kind of bring that out of them to help us navigate the resources and the direction of the support. So if that's the case, it really helps us in the direction of where we want to go with the athlete and how we want to support the athlete. And then we combine that, with what you would say more traditional testing and analytics, right? So we have a batch of testing protocols that we have at our training center and in our laboratory, and we go through these tests a few times and then trying to understand what the data means and if there are indications in that data of where we should be looking at supporting this athlete. So those are kind of the biggest channels of information that we use, and then if we're lucky enough and we get support enough for this athlete and the project itself within the organization, we then go out in the field and we bring together a team of experts, performance experts, around the athlete, and we're trying to create a scenario or an environment for testing and analytics in different ways. So we have a massive network of experts in all different performance domains, and then we bring them in and trying to kind of start with one direction and one question, and then trying to work ourselves through those layers of question and try to get to the right place. So that's one of our strengths, is that we are able to be that agile and to bring teams together around the athlete and questions potentially, and go out in the field, set up the environment, and get everything from motion capture to biomechanical testing in different ways, using force plates, force insoles and accelerometers, IMU devices, etc. So for us, that's really, really exciting and informative of how we then look at the athlete, look at their environment, look at their needs for the sport.
Yeah, that's outstanding. That's incredible. I mean, the amount of resources that they're able to put together for this are just, it's amazing. I know that, going back to Project Endurance and one of the white papers that came out of that, you guys have done a lot of experimentation on the central governor theory. And I know our listeners, our knowledgeable listeners, are really going to want to know about this, because the work that you guys did on this was absolutely groundbreaking. And you know, the sort of the abstract behind it was during fatiguing exercise in healthy humans, central governor theory posits that the brain output slows before a certain amount of peripheral fatigue, leaving a central reserve. Your white paper put forth was proposed that highly trained athletes might have access to that central reserve beyond where, you know, the central governor is backing people down. And in layman's terms, for those of, you know, for everybody who's listening, that basically means you got more left in the tank. How do we tap into that? So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that research, what you were trying to do, and what your outcomes were like.
Right. Yeah. So this is an example of a program or a project we put together with Mount Sinai and their neuroscientists, and what we were trying to do is to figure out if we could override some of the signaling, in fatiguing athletes to start to slow down or stop the action or exercise, and see if there are opportunities, for pushing them further, and what that could be. So we were using, stimulating technologies and techniques to stimulate the cortex of the leg function, basically, and we were doing different protocols of how we could push them further than what they think they could, and kind of overwrite that threshold when the fatigue and the signaling are so strong for the athletes. So yeah, we put together this team, and we were together for about a week, where we did laboratory testing first for a few days, and trying to understand what the protocol should look like and understand what we really were after. And then we brought the athletes into out into their environment in the field, and we were doing the same type of protocols and concepts in the field. And what we were looking for was, to see if we could figure out if there is something beyond the normal signaling of fatigue. And we did see that there seemed to be opportunities as you getting more and more fatigued as a human. The cortical signaling is actually upregulated. So we did see that the signal from the brain and into the muscles were faster as they were fatiguing, and with that, you could speculate that we are more sensitive to and more welcoming to the exposure of external input. So that could be something that's really interesting, to understand what input could be effective, and how do we receive input, in what way do we receive input as we are fatiguing. So we saw this kind of cortical silence period getting faster as they were fatiguing, right? So that was kind of the main reason we saw, and we think that there is an opportunity for external input.
That's fascinating. That's just so cool.
That's really interesting. I think, the first question that kind of comes to my mind with that, and obviously, without maybe knowing quite enough, the first question that I would have is, people talk about all the things that go into effect with, a blanketed term like mental toughness, right? Like people say those types of
grit
things,
or whatever else.
And there's been so much that's been put into that. Is it trainable and those types of things? And I guess my question would be, as you look at that, and based on what you guys did, I would consider that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, like that to be pretty acute, right? Like what you guys did. If there's within that opportunity, is there the possibility that that could be trained, if that signaling could be altered through exposures at various levels, or through different frequencies of those exposures? And would those longitudinally be potentially trainable in any way, shape, or form? Or is the only way that that happens is through how you guys manipulated that? Do you have any thought or input on that at all?
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely hitting a very interesting topic, and I think it's very trainable. I think the neurological system, and like JC was talking about, the inhibitions that the neurological system creates to kind of protect the different physiological organisms in the body, I think can be very trained, and can be a lot more efficient. And also, I think what you're talking about there, Joel, is that it actually allows for more force output, more physiological output, mechanical output, the more it's trained. So the exposure and the acceptance of signaling to our different organs is definitely trainable, and we have seen that it has a pretty strong and adaptable effect when we change, let's say, the EMG, so electrical input potentiation to the different fiber structures. It changes when we're changing altitude for maybe a day or so, but then after 48 hours, the EMG looks a lot more similar to the norm down in the lab at sea level. So I think the neurological system has a big effect on mechanical output, but it's very trainable. So I think the more you expose to the environment that you're asking the body to work in, you definitely have the ability to adapt to it, right? It's been shown in research that EMG, let's say drop jumps, for example, you increase the jump height down to the floor, from 20 to 30 to 40 centimeters. At some point, the EMG is actually less than it was, 10 centimeters lower. So there is those governing mechanics that are protective in its nature, and the more you expose the neurological system to that environment, the more you adapt to it.
So would it be, to put it in layman's terms again, for our listeners a little bit, would it be fair to say what you're doing is you're taking these athletes who are highly trained physical specimens anyway, and then exposing them to potentially what the limit of their, let's say in the case of an endurance athlete, what the limit of their cardiovascular abilities might be, or i.e. what they think it might be, and over time that actually changes the way they handle that environment. It's for all intents and purposes, it's suffering, right? How much suffering can you tolerate, prior to hitting the wall? And essentially what these guys are doing is they're taking that limitation and stretching it out as far as humanly possible, and then getting them comfortable with it. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's very close. It's this allowance for a higher mechanical output that's from the beginning it's very suppressed, or it's inhibitory from the beginning. Right. When you expose the different organisms to that environment, but then the more you're in there or exposing the system to that environment, the more allowance you have to work within that mechanical output, so to speak.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. I think my mind kind of jumps back and forth between thinking of specific scenarios, like take SEAL training, when guys go through buds and stuff like that, and the dosages that they give them, and they're always putting them into this highly fatigued state, and they're obviously, again, it's like we talked about this in a previous episode where I kind of always use the analogy of just having dosages of venom, right, which is like preparing for the ability to handle the bite, so to speak. And within that, you see how much influence we have, and Scotty and I were just talking about this, about cognitive function under fatigue, and and some of the other what I would consider to be variables within that, like you alluded to with mechanical, biomechanical things that are going to be affected, and how those are really interplayed, right? And so when you think about the ability to expand that envelope, and you think about mechanical efficiency and cognitive function, and some of these other things, like it's interesting to see, it's kind of one of those, like, which came first, is it the chicken or the eggs?
Right.
Where you look at and you're going, okay, well, which one is affecting the other, or how are they interplayed? And do you think that there's a possibility where I'm assuming that it depends on the person, right? Like which one affects the other? Because we know I've worked with some endurance athletes, and we look at mechanical efficiency, right? And we know that if we enhance their mechanical efficiency over time to where their energy expenditure cumulatively is lower based on their efficiency quotient, that their fatigue factor is going to be lower at the end of the day too, right? And so I think those are some really interesting kind of dynamics, and I'm sure, like, what's the follow-up with that? Are you guys taking that information and moving on and saying, like, all right, well, let's try this next with this kind of realm, or did you guys kind of leave it at that and move on to the next project, or did that open up any like kind of windows of opportunity that you want to explore at beyond that now?
Yeah, so we want to, and we have been working more on individual basis. So we're taking that information and then trying to build smaller projects around the individual athletes, and looking at kind of their opportunity with changing between high and low altitude, and how do we do that for each athlete, and looking at the opportunity to expose the athlete with the neurological kind of allowance at the different altitudes. So we worked with the athletes of getting up to high altitude, and looking at the EMG responses over hours, actually, with multiple protocols a day, where we start to look at when the neurological system adapts to the new environment versus the physiological system. So we have been playing around with that on an individual basis with athletes. So we're taking the learnings and then trying to apply them further into the athletes, and what each one of them need.
Along that same vein, and let's take this in a slightly different direction, because we're talking about the physical systems, we're talking about the neurological systems, mechanical, everything else.
Yeah.
How does this apply to the actual psychological system of the athlete, i.e., what they think they are capable of doing, or what an individual might think they're capable of doing, and being able to sort of break down those barriers or those pre-existing ceilings that they say, oh, well, I can do more than this. I mean, you're fortunate that you're able to work with the most elite athletes in the world that have they don't really have much of a self-imposed ceiling. Some of them do, some of them don't. But I mean, as it pertains to their thought process on this, is this type of research actually proving to them, oh, I can do more, so I'm going to do more? Or, you know, in layman's terms, a takeaway from this might be to say you're only limited by what you think you can do, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, we work a lot in that space, right? And like other performance programs, we have the Department of Psychology, etc., and we have psychologists working with us on a daily basis. They're working with athletes on a daily basis. But to that, I would say that we're very fortunate in terms of being able to congregate groups of athletes from different sports. And, as you guys would know, we all get used to our own norms, so to speak. And it's very easy to kind of sense that, yeah, what you do in your own field isn't that impressive. But when you have other athletes, other groups of people looking into what the other athlete is doing, it's like completely mind-blowing, right? So, we have big wave surfers that are surfing something that's out of this world, and then you have the snowboarders and skaters who do incredible things on the boards, and we many times we actually put projects together with those different sports in one project, and what we have seen is that we take advantage of this, what we call cross-pollination, and it seems like it becomes this really interesting energy during the project where the athletes are able to use each other to kind of further what their beliefs are in terms of where their ceilings are, what they think they can do, and it's been really effective to see this kind of cross-pollination and the energy happens between athletes and then between coaches, etc., when we put those projects together. So that's something that I have kind of suggested to teams when they come in and ask what they should do, to further improve their training and their environment for energy, etc. And it comes back to me, this cross-pollination between athletes seems to be super healthy, and it creates a nuance of opportunity that athletes usually bring with them back home. So that's it. Kind of came about just by us putting those projects together, and we didn't really plan for it, and then we saw that, hang on, this is something here, and we kind of built on it, and now we're trying to use it as one of the strategies in our programs and in our projects. So it's been something that's been really healthy and creates some opportunity in there for sure.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Like, I just imagine you take some elite people from the same environment, and I think that especially in those examples you gave, think of the skateboarders, snowboarders, surfers, all these guys, where the thresholds of like what they do, within the sport has been expanded so much.
Oh,
and
insane.
The things that they, you watch them do, you just kind of sit back and go, holy crap, like what else is there you could possibly do, right?
Yeah.
And then you take one from each one of those environments and bring them together, and because of how they think and act and whatever, you bring, it provides a different lens sometimes where, it's like bringing people from the same environment together. They're all seeing the same problem, and then you bring someone from a different environment in, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, did you think about this, or did you try this, or whatever? And all of a sudden there's a slight window of opportunity that maybe was developed based on that. So that's really cool, because I think for me, you look at how much specialization we have in sport now, and you think of all of our kids that we see that play in clubs and things like that, and they're just around the same people all the time. And we talk about even just athletic development. If you dummy that down,
right,
and think about what we as coaches preach all the time about those fundamental things in developmental stages of life where we say, hey, you know, you may be a great football player, lacrosse player, whatever, but you should play basketball, you should play lacrosse, you should play whatever, and it just opens up what their potential athletic ability will be based on exposing themselves to different things.
Right.
Right.
Right. And different
Yeah.
theories too. And I
Sure.
think that's a huge piece of it. I mean, I can only imagine what it must have been like if, I don't know whether this ever happened, Per, but like if you got Ian Walsh and Travis Rice in the same room together, I would
Exactly.
I'd pay a lot of money to be on the fly on the wall for that conversation.
Yes. No, exactly.
Yeah.
I think just you hit on there, JC. It's like the learnings they have and how they look at things, right? That's the really important nuance piece in this. You know, we all get kind of used to what is norm, and we reference everything against that norm and what we know.
Right.
But then suddenly you have, let's say a basketball player come into your football player environment, and they've grown up different, and they're thinking about problems differently, and they're looking at opportunities differently, etc. So that just broadens the perspective we have as athletes and coaches and humans, really. And we can draw from that if we do it in the right way, and if the opportunity is there going forward.
That's outstanding. Well, this has been incredibly valuable. We're getting near the end of our time here, and we have a fun little thing that we do at the end with our presenters that we call the Fast Five. I'm going to turn it over to Joel, and he can explain to you what that is.
So the Fast Five is kind of something we put together. We have a long list of F words, if you will, clean ones, and I always put that out there as a little bit of a prereq. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you was we'll start with findings. And out of all the various projects you've done, and I've seen and read through and had an opportunity to look at a lot of the really interesting things you've done, what's one of the projects you've done where your findings surprised you, so that it was not what you expected or what you hypothetically assumed was going to happen based on whatever it was that you did?
Yeah, no, I think a little bit on kind of the last topic we're on to understand that some of the athletes we work with really have show that what is possible, and for us it's so interesting, exciting, trying to unlock that potential they have and what they bring to the table. So for me, it's just fascinating to see different athletes and how they look at things, and just the JC was talking about it earlier. Our athletes, some of them are like have no boundaries in how they look at problems or opportunities. So that's one thing that's been super fascinating to me over those 10 years is to see Robbie Madison, for example, be able to jump 110 feet up with a motorcycle onto scaffolding and things like that. The ability to look outside of what is normal is fascinating to me.
Yeah, that's very cool.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Out of those, which one of these projects would you consider to be your favorite thus far, of the most probably interesting to you?
Hard to say, obviously, but I think something that's really eye-opening to me is the motocross world, and see what those athletes go through. Those athletes have to combine, so much endurance work with strength and being able to handle the bikes at such an amazing level. It's really incredible to me. I was fortunate to be down with them. A couple of the motocross guys down in Florida, in Tallahassee, and what they were doing during the practice was just fascinating to me, and see how they look at their sport and how they really come back from injuries, kind of mechanical they wrench in their bikes, and they think they wrench in their bodies. You know, they put a plate in and then they back into it again.
Yeah.
And a broken collarbone is just very, very different than I have been used to in the past. So yeah, learnings there, and then kind of brings you out of this thinking about what is normal and what is possible.
Yeah. So within everything that you've explored, you kind of touched on physiologically, neurologically, all these things. Like, what's something you're a fan of right now that you're wanting to kind of travel or trailblaze as far as you know, ideas or stuff like that, things that maybe are on your radar of stuff to dig more into?
Yeah, right. It comes from learning, right? I think that's what's really the stimulating part is learning and more knowledge, and with that comes technologies is a hot topic right now, and I think for us motion capture in the field is something that has been a big piece of kind of our push the last couple of years, is to be able to do real data gathering collection in the field to do better decisions. So for us, we're pushing really hard in that space right now to understand more what's going on in the field and in the environment for the athletes to create better decisions.
Yeah. Flaws. How about that? What in all the things that you found out, do you have anything that you would consider, or that you look back on, traditional programming and training and things like that you say people should really think differently about X comparatively to what you found in some of your studies?
Right. Yeah, I think you're hitting on a very interesting topic, and something that we need to balance on a consistent basis is, and that we talk within the team and within the organization, is always, how much do you push into the unknown and into the space of hopefully finding things with athletes versus using more evidence-based practices that going to have effect, and what effect you're going to receive by doing those actions. So that's a constant kind of push and pull for us, is how much do we explore, how much do we use traditional work, because our programming in place, but athletes, they decade by decade they come through, right? So even if we're using very traditional and I don't know, boring or very known testing protocols, and they get old, that doesn't mean that it's old for the athletes, because they are new and young and they're coming into the program and going through the process. So for us, the flaws, I guess, are sometimes we kind of missed and pushed too hard in one or the other area, and kind of missed opportunity for each athlete to see if we can jolt or send them on a little bit better trajectory.
Yeah, I think that's good.
That's awesome.
I think everybody does that in the program. You're trying to determine how much, I guess risk is the thing that comes to mind, right? Like how much do I want to work in some gray space to see if there's a positive effect or some blue sky territory that I could potentially attack that you don't want to drift too far. So I think that's great. Last one here for you, Per. Maybe not quite as scientific, but fun. What's Per do for fun? You live in a great place with lots of things to do. What else gets you invigorated?
Yeah, no, really cool, fun. I have a son here, and he plays ice hockey, and that obviously takes a lot of my time and my interest when I'm home in Park City. And he and I usually go out and play around and come up with ideas how we can do training and have fun playing different sports, etc., with each other. So that's kind of my go-to when I'm home here in Park City, Utah.
And I was going to say, I'd imagine you've had a little bit of time to work on that recently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, big change for me, right? Usually I commute back down to Santa Monica on a weekly basis. So this been a little bit of a reset and a little bit pause for a while. So yeah,
Excellent.
that part, the family part has been great for me. But yeah, I think like everybody else, we want to get back into it and get back to work and you know, push forward and faster. So yeah, that's where we're at.
There you go. Well, Per, greatly appreciate you being on the show with us today. This has been really incredible. I know our listeners are going to be just, you know, dying to know more about you, and hopefully we can get you into one of our conferences again here soon and have you come and speak. And we really just appreciate you taking the time away from your family and your work to be a part of this webcast today.
Absolutely. Thanks, JC. And thanks, Joel, Scott. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again to our guest Per for sitting down with us today and discussing all the great things at Red Bull High Performance. We hope that you enjoyed today's session. We encourage you to leave your comments in the comment section below and also subscribe to our page to stay up to date on all of our future episodes as well as past episodes as we strive to continue bringing you the best in human performance from the industry leaders in the field. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.